The night of the Regional Hospital Foundation Gala, I had a letter in my clutch bag. My mother-in-law didn't know about it. My husband didn't know about it. The 200 people seated at white draped tables in the grand ballroom of the Omni Nashville Hotel had no idea that the woman in the navy dress standing near the entrance wasn't just another +1. They had no idea what was about to happen before the evening ended. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning. My name is Cassie Marsh. I was 28 years old when I married into the Whitfield family, and I want to be clear about something before I say anything else. I didn't go into it blind. I knew his mother was particular. I knew she had opinions. I knew she'd built the Whitfield name into something that mattered in Nashville's philanthropic circles. The galas, the hospital boards, the charity auctions where people bid $10,000 on a dinner just to say they did. I knew all of that. What I didn't know was that particular was a polished word for something much uglier. I met my husband at a conference. I was a registered nurse working nights in the cardiac ICU at Vanderbilt, and he was there for a panel on hospital administration. We ended up talking for 2 hours over terrible conference coffee, and 3 years later, we were engaged. I thought that was the story. I thought that was the whole thing. His mother had a different version. The first time I met her, she looked at me the way you look at a stain on a tablecloth. Not angry exactly, just inconvenienced. She shook my hand with 2 fingers, smiled at a point somewhere past my ear, and said, "How lovely." A nurse. The pause before nurse did all the work. It carried a whole sentence inside it. It said, "Just a nurse." I told myself I was being sensitive. The second time I saw her, she cornered me in the kitchen at a family dinner and asked very pleasantly whether I'd considered going back to school. "There's no shame in wanting more for yourself," she said, refilling her wine. "Some people are perfectly happy at the bedside level, of course. It's just, well, you're marrying into a family with a certain standing." I smiled. I said something non-committal. I went to find my then fiancé, and when I told him what she'd said, he laughed and told me she was just old-fashioned. "She means well, Cass. That's just how she talks." That became the phrase of our marriage. That's just how she talks. She talked about my schedule being so unpredictable when we discussed where we'd spend the holidays. She talked about nursing being such a hard life, all those overnight shifts in front of her country club friends, delivered with a sympathy so exquisitely calibrated it landed like contempt. She once told me, at a fundraiser, that she thought I was very brave to wear my work shoes to an event. I was wearing flats. They were $180 flats from a brand she'd never heard of, which apparently put them in a different category than shoes. And through all of it, my husband stood just slightly to the left of wherever she was standing, nodding in a way that wasn't quite agreement but was never disagreement either. That particular angle, that particular silence, I want to be fair, I loved him. I think I loved him for a long time past the point where I should have been asking harder questions. He was warm and private, funny in the way that makes you feel seen, generous in small ways that accumulate into something that feels like safety. But safety built on someone else's terms is not safety. I learned that slowly. I learned it the way you learn you've been breathing shallow for years, not in the single moment, but in the gradual awareness that your chest has been tight for a very long time. We'd been married 2 years when I was nominated for a unit-level clinical excellence award at Vanderbilt. It was not a huge thing in the scheme of things. It was an internal recognition, a small ceremony, a plaque. But it was the first time anyone had formally told me I was exceptional at what I did, and I was proud of it in a way I hadn't expected. I mentioned it at dinner one Sunday. His mother looked up from her salad, tilted her head, and said, "Oh, how sweet. They do those for nurses?" I excused myself to the bathroom and stood over the sink for a full minute, running the cold water before I could go back out. That night, lying next to my husband in the dark, I said, "She did it again." He said, "She didn't mean anything by it, Cass." I said, "She always means something by it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "She comes from a different generation. You can't take it personally every time." And there it was. The realignment I'd been living with for 3 years. His mother's words against my perception, and whenever they conflicted, my perception was the thing that needed adjusting. I stopped mentioning it after that. I stopped a lot of things. The dinner happened on a Tuesday in March. We were at their house. the big colonial on the hill in Belmead that his mother had redecorated 3 times since his father died. Always white, always just slightly too cold. His older brother was there with his wife Vanessa, who'd learned years ago to perform a kind of cheerful neutrality that I had once mistaken for warmth. There were candles. There was a salad with ingredients I didn't recognize. His mother was wearing something cream-colored and intentional. She waited until dessert. I've thought about that since. The waiting. The patience of it. She let the conversation get comfortable, but the wine do its work. Let everyone settle into that after-dinner softness. Then she set down her fork and looked at me and said, very calmly, "Cassidy, I want to discuss something, and I hope we can do it like adults." I put down my spoon. "I've spoken with my son," she said, not looking at him. "And I think we all know that this marriage isn't working the way any of us hoped." The room had gone so still I could hear the candle flames. "I've had a document prepared," she said. She opened the small leather portfolio she'd had beside her chair the whole evening. I'd noticed it and thought nothing of it, and slid a packet of papers across the table toward me. "It's an agreement. I think it's very fair, actually. There's a settlement. A good one. But the condition is that the process begins within the next 60 days. I looked at the papers. I looked at my husband. He was looking at the table. "She's right, Cass," he said quietly. "I think this is probably for the best." For the best. As if the marriage were a houseplant that hadn't taken to the light. His mother folded her hands. "You'll want to have a lawyer look at it, of course, but I think you'll find it more than generous." I picked up the papers. I looked at them for a long moment. Then I set them back down on the table, took a breath, and said, "Thank you for dinner. I'll see myself out." I drove home in silence. I did not cry until I was inside, until I had locked the door and sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets. And then I cried for a long time. Not just for the marriage, for the 3 years of swallowing, for the award I'd been embarrassed to be proud of, for the word just that she'd been quietly placing in front of everything I was. Then I got up. I washed my face. I went to bed. And when I woke up the next morning, something had shifted. I called my friend Denise first. She's the charge nurse I've known since our first year at Vanderbilt, the one who tells me the truth in the specific way only people who've seen you at your worst can manage. I sat in my car in the parking garage before my shift and told her everything. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she said, "Okay. First, don't sign anything. Second, call a lawyer today. Third, and I mean this, Cassie, this might be the best thing that ever happened to you. And I know that sounds insane right now." I didn't believe her yet, but I wrote down the name she gave me. The lawyer's name was Beverly Cho. She was a family law attorney with an office in Midtown. And the first thing she said when I sat down across from her and slid the papers over was, "Who put this together?" When I explained, she looked up at me over her reading glasses and said, "They made a few interesting assumptions about what you know. Let's talk about that." What Beverly explained to me over the next hour rearranged several things I thought I understood. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, 3 years of marriage, 2 incomes, mine included, because night shift differential adds up, and my husband's family had apparently calculated my understanding of my own rights at roughly 0. The settlement they're offering, Beverly said, is about 40% of what you'd be entitled to in a standard proceeding. I sat with that for a moment. "They thought I'd just sign it," I said. Beverly looked at me. "A lot of people do." I did not sign it. Here's what I did instead. I kept going to work. I kept showing up to my shifts, kept doing the work I'd been doing, the chest compressions at 2 in the morning, the family conversations in quiet hallways, the split-second decisions that people in certain dining rooms in Belmead have never had to make and never will. I kept doing it, and I let it remind me who I was when no one was defining me. I enrolled in a family nurse practitioner program at Belmont University. I'd been thinking about it for 2 years, kept putting it off for reasons I couldn't quite articulate, reasons that, in retrospect, had a lot to do with a voice that wasn't mine telling me not to want too much. The first night of orientation, I sat in a classroom and felt something open back up in my chest that I hadn't realized had been closed. I did not tell my husband. I did not tell his mother. I went to class on the days I wasn't working, and I studied on the days I was, and I let the process move forward with Beverly handling the legal side while I handled the becoming a different person side. His mother called twice. I did not answer. She left voicemails that were pleasant in their cadence and surgical in their content, reiterating the settlement, referencing the mutual benefit of a clean resolution, once mentioning, very briefly, very carefully, that prolonging things would be awkward given the upcoming foundation gala. Right, the gala. The Whitfield family had been supporters of the hospital foundation for 20 years. His mother sat on the planning committee. The annual gala was the kind of event where hospital leadership, donors, and community figures gathered to celebrate grants awarded, programs funded, initiatives launched. My husband's family bought a table every year, and every year I had sat at that table in something his mother had suggested I wear, eating food I couldn't pronounce, smiling at people whose names I'd been coached on. This year was going to be different. 3 months before the gala, I received something. The Vanderbilt Nursing Excellence Awards are not the small internal recognition I'd gotten 2 years ago. These are the ones that matter, the ones submitted by department heads, reviewed by a committee, given at a public ceremony attended by hospital administration and representatives from the State Board of Nursing. There are 6 of them given per year across the entire system. I won one. Beverly called me the day after the ceremony. "Saw the announcement in the hospital newsletter," she said. "Congratulations. Also, I have an update on our timeline." The legal process had moved faster than his mother's lawyer had expected, Beverly told me, partly because of how they'd structured the original document. Certain assumptions had been made that didn't hold, and partly because of a discovery that Beverly, in her understated way, described as clarifying. The voicemails. His mother's voicemails to me, in which she had referenced the settlement, the timeline, the desire for a clean resolution before the gala. Those voicemails had been reviewed. Beverly explained that in Tennessee, one-party consent means a voicemail left on your phone is yours, and a voicemail in which a third party references a legal proceeding and implies consequences tied to a social calendar constitutes something that family law attorneys find professionally interesting. She involved herself in the legal process, Beverly said. That changes a few things. I sat quietly with that. "How much does it change?" I asked. Beverly paused. "Put it this way. The settlement they offered you and the settlement they'll be signing are going to be quite different documents." I want to tell you about the night of the gala honestly, because I've seen the way these stories get told. The villain gets what's coming, the music swells, everyone applauds. Real life is quieter than that. Real vindication rarely arrives with a soundtrack. But there are moments. I had been invited, as it turned out, because the Hospital Foundation had decided to recognize the Nursing Excellence Award recipients at the gala this year, a decision made by the Foundation Board, of which my mother-in-law was a member, before the full situation had become clear to her. By the time she understood what the evening now contained, the program had already been printed. I wore a dress I had chosen myself. Dark green, clean lines, the kind of thing that requires no explanation. I drove myself. I walked in alone. The ballroom was beautiful, the way those rooms always are, the kind of beauty that is expensive and a little impersonal, that exists to signal a certain kind of seriousness. I found my seat at the Foundation's recognition table, not the Whitfield table. I sat with the other award recipients and with Beverly, who had come as my guest. His mother was already seated when I arrived. I saw the moment she saw me. The slight recalibration, the composure reassembled in real time. She nodded. I nodded back. My husband was not there. He had, Beverly had informed me, made different arrangements for the evening. The program moved the way those programs move. Remarks, acknowledgments, a video about the Foundation's work, polite applause. Then the recognition of award recipients. When they called my name, I stood up and walked to the front of the room. The woman presenting said my name and my unit, and a sentence about the nature of the award. Something about patient outcomes, about the particular skill required to hold a family's fear, alongside a clinical reality and navigate both with care. She said I had been described by my colleagues as someone who made the hardest moments bearable. I thought about the kitchen floor. I thought about the papers slid across the table. I thought about just a nurse. I stood at the microphone and I thanked my unit and I thanked Denise and I said simply and clearly that I was proud of the work I did and that I was just getting started. I did not look at the Whitfield table when I said it. I didn't need to. I walked back to my seat. Beverly leaned over and said quietly, "That was good." At the end of the evening, as people were gathering their things, his mother crossed the room toward me. She looked composed. She always looked composed. "Cassidy," she said. "Yes," I said. She seemed to be deciding something. Then, "Congratulations on the award." "Thank you," I said. She left first. I watched her go and felt, not triumph exactly, not satisfaction in the sharp way I might have expected. Something quieter, something more like finally. The settlement was finalized 6 weeks later. I won't give you numbers, but I will tell you that Beverly had been accurate in her prediction. I will tell you that the voicemails were, in the end, quite clarifying. I'm 31 years old now. I am in my second year of my F&P program. I still work in the cardiac ICU. I have an apartment downtown with windows that face east, which means I wake up to light every morning. I'm not on nights. And I have started to understand that this, just this, the light, the work, the choosing for myself, is what I was supposed to be building all along. There's a version of this story where I'm angry. There's a version where I cataloged every condescension, every carefully placed jest, every moment I swallowed something I should have said. Some days I still carry those, I'm being honest. But mostly what I feel is clear. My mother-in-law handed me a document she thought would reduce me to a problem to be solved quietly before an inconvenient social engagement. What she handed me instead was the moment I stopped performing smallness for people who would never be satisfied anyway. She thought she was ending a chapter. She was actually starting one. She just didn't know it was mine. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually costs to shrink yourself for someone else's comfort. Not in a dramatic way, just the slow, daily math of it. The opinions you don't finish, the pride you tuck away before it can be used against you. The version of yourself you quietly retire because someone at a dinner table made you feel like she took up too much room. I did that for 3 years. I got very good at it. And the strange thing is, from the outside, it probably looked like grace. It probably looked like I was easygoing, adaptable, unbothered. What it actually was, I know now, is a kind of slow disappearance. My mother-in-law didn't invent that disappearance. I have to be honest about that. She handed me the conditions, but I was the one who kept agreeing to them. Every time I told myself she didn't mean anything by it, every time I smoothed it over and went back to the table, I was making a choice. I didn't understand that at the time. I thought I was being the bigger person. What I was actually doing was teaching everyone in that room exactly how much they could take from me. The papers she slid across the table that Tuesday night in March, I think she expected tears. Or argument. Or at minimum, the particular silence of someone who has been caught off guard and doesn't know what to do next. What she got was me picking them up, setting them back down, and walking out. Not because I was strong in that moment. I wasn't. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time after. But something had already shifted before I even got home. Some quiet internal reckoning that said, "This is the last time you let someone else define the terms." That's the thing about consequences. They don't always arrive loudly. Sometimes they arrive as a voicemail. Sometimes they arrive as a clause in a legal document that a very good attorney looks at over her reading glasses and says, "They made some interesting assumptions about what you know." The decisions my mother-in-law made to involve herself directly, to reference a legal proceeding in a personal message, to calculate my ignorance as a variable she could rely on. Those decisions came back around. Not because the universe is tidy, because actions have weight, and weight lands somewhere eventually. I think about Denise telling me, in that parking garage, that this might be the best thing that ever happened to me. I thought she was being kind in the way people are kind when they don't know what else to say. She was actually just right. The FNP program, the award, the east-facing windows I wake up to now, none of that exists in the version of my life where I kept swallowing things at that table. The ending they designed for me had a very low ceiling. The one I built for myself doesn't. What I know now that I didn't know then is that intelligence isn't just what you learn in a classroom. It's also the willingness to look clearly at what a situation actually is, not what you wish it were. My husband was not going to change. His mother was not going to soften. And the kindest thing I ever did for myself was to stop investing effort into outcomes that the evidence had already told me weren't coming. Integrity held up under pressure is the only kind that means anything. Mine was tested in that dining room, in that gala ballroom, in the attorney's office, in the hospital break room, and every quiet moment in between. I didn't always get it right. But I kept showing up to the work, the actual work, the nursing, the studying, the hard conversations with Beverly, the harder conversations with myself. And that accumulation, that steady refusal to stop, turned out to be the only revenge worth having. She thought she was closing a door. She just didn't realize I'd already found a better one.